Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I'll be showing you some glimpses of my latest tutorial on Patreon, which is this Blue Orchid. On Patreon you will find the tutorial for orchid number 2, which is this bigger one, but if you want to learn to paint both, then these both will be available on my Gumroad account for you to purchase, the link to which will be in the description box. It's a 3-hour long tutorial on Patreon in real time and a total of 6.5 hours on Gumroad for both. So let's get started. First, let's mix up some colors. Now for this flower, most of the color mixing I do it on the paper, so I'll be keeping some neat pigments here on my palette. The first color will be Phthalocyanin blue from Cenelia, which I think is the perfect color for this flower. You can even go for Windsor blue green shade, and this color will go on the outer parts of the petal. The second color I'll be taking is Cobalt blue, again from Cenelia, for the innermost parts of the petal. And of course both these colors will also go in the center as well. Now I'll use one more color which is in the center of these petals, which is Windsor violet. Next, I can also see some grays on the outer edges of the petal, for which I will take neutral tint from Winsor & Newton. If you don't have this color, then you can always mix your own grays with all the 3 primaries, or even by mixing French ultramarine blue with burnt sienna. There are lots of ways of mixing your own grays. Now I'll also mix some neutral tint with phthalo blue, which will go in all the shadow areas. This is more like indigo, but I'm going to mix it using these same pigments which are there on my palette. For some shadows, I'll also mix neutral tint with cobalt blue to get a bluish grey kind of color. Now for the center, we will mix the colors later as we are going to first paint all the petals. So let's start painting. So before we begin, let's lighten up the sketch a little with a kneaded eraser. Now for the brushes, I'll be using size 4 and 6. These are from Princeton Velvet Touch long round brushes. The difference between a long round is that it has a very fine point, which I love, and the round one is not that pointed. I will use size 6 for all the bigger petals and 4 for the smaller ones. We'll start with first wash, which we will be doing using wet on wet technique, and here's my setup. 2 sections of water. I've also kept some extra palettes for the yellows and greens, or you can just make some space here on the main palette. So before we begin, I just want to quickly tell you that here we have a very strong highlight which I'm going to exclude while applying water glaze. So I'll be applying water on the whole petal except there, just to be on the safe side. And you can see on the reference picture that this highlight has a hard edge, so that should not be a problem. Also, it's an important highlight and I don't want to miss it. But I'll take the water up till the edges because they have some color. So let's start. So take clean water and start applying on the petal And I'm working on an easel, so there is a slight incline, so some of the water will get pooled down on the bottom part of the petal. So you have to keep on, pushing that water towards the center if you're also working on an easel. Apply an even coat of water. We'll be adding so many colors and also doing some lifting. So give a good 2 to 3 layers of water glaze so that we have enough time with the colors. But the glaze has to be even with no puddles anywhere or any dry areas. So take your time in doing this step. And suppose if your glaze does dry out, then stop working and let the petal dry completely. Suppose in between your glaze dries out while applying colors, then wait for it to completely dry, apply water again, and then continue. And apply water as if you're painting with water, so within the edges, and keep on glancing from sideways to check if the coat is even and glistening. So here I'm showing you how your water glaze should look. It's very even, glistening, and you should be able to see the texture of the paper. So let's take the first color. I'll take the lightest one, which is phthalo blue. If it's too watery, then add more color. Tap off the excess and then start. Don't start right from the edge of the water glaze, little bit below. And first just apply some color, just drop in some color to see how your glaze is acting. If it's spreading too much, then just wait for a few seconds. So after it spreads, then just slowly drag whatever is there on your brush towards the center of the petal where it is less. Now wash the brush and with a clean damp brush, start controlling this color by softening the edges and also stopping it from going where we don't want. And I'm pushing a little bit of that color towards the top highlight edge. And I keep on softening the edges with a clean damp brush just to ensure that not too much color goes towards the edge. And we don't want the edge completely white because we are working on a white background. Next color I'm taking here is Windsor Violet. Now this is a very dark color, so use it very sparingly, use it very watery. And I just mix both the colors on the paper. So next I'm taking cobalt blue and I'm just dropping it on the inner part. Now if you feel that your color is not sticking to the paper, that means it's got too much of water gathered over there. So just take your damp brush and just soak up the extra water. I slowly move towards the center of the petal and I also paint in some veins. I again wash my brush and with a clean damp brush now I start lifting off wherever I don't want too much of color, like on the edges, even in between the veins. There is a highlight just on the top of this blue that we have applied. And the glaze is still wet, so I keep on coming in with more colors, keep on darkening it. So just below this highlight, I'm adding a little bit more color, even on the veins. And as your glaze starts to dry out, you will find that you have more control on the colors. So you can keep on adding more of them. Now the glaze is drying up, so at this stage I try to paint in more veins and more shadows just underneath the highlight. Now the color will not spread that much, so we can take this opportunity to add in more colors, and I take very little color just on the tip of my brush. I perfect the veins and also start lifting up more highlights. This is only possible if you have glazed with sufficient amount of water in the beginning. Also, I keep on correcting the edges, making them as neat as possible right from this first layer. And once you feel that the glaze is drying, then just stop working and let that petal dry completely. And of course, we are going to come in the second layer with more line work. That is, we are going to paint more of these veins. So just do as much as your painting allows you to. And once you feel that it's not taking up any more layers, or it's completely dry, then just stop working. So while that petal is drying, let's start working on the bottommost petals. Do not work on the petals which are just next to the drying petal. For the smaller petals, I'll use my size 4 brush. And one more tip I'll share is, before applying water, always make a quick plan as to which colors you're going to apply where. This will save you time. After applying water, if you start thinking, then your water glaze will dry up. So making a quick plan is always very helpful. So now here we have a shadow underneath that overlapping petal. So I might use that neutral tint with phthalo blue combination, or just neutral tint on its own below that overlapping petal in the shadow areas. And also I have this part of the center tentacle that's what I'm calling, I don't know the name of that, and I'm just going to color it with a hard 3H pencil, and I can just take the water glaze up till here, and even the color up till here, because that part is quite dark. Okay, so before you start applying your water glaze, just have a quick plan and see that all your edges and your area, you know where to apply your water glaze. So we have phthalo blue and the shadow color on this petal. We don't have Windsor violet. So I start by applying water glaze for our wet on wet technique. Always keep two separate bowls of water, one for cleaning your dirty brushes and other for clean water glaze for the wet on wet technique. This way you will keep all your colors your colors will look very fresh. So I start with phthalo blue, and I'll start right under the petal where there is a shadow. Always start by dropping your color into your darkest area, so that way we'll not put accidentally any darker color in the lighter area. Okay, and I'm following the direction of the veins, applying more color in that part where I can see it more darker. And now, since we already have phthalo blue, I'm using just neutral tint for the shadow, just dropping it so it will mix with phthalo blue and create a shadow color. The edges of this petal, the bottom edges are quite light. Just going to add a little bit of cobalt blue in that uh, shadow area. And don't leave the edges completely white, otherwise what will happen is, if we when we erase off the pencil, that petal will lose its definition, the shape will just vanish. So I'm just going to apply very light phthalo blue even on the edges of the petal. Keep everything very light and transparent at this stage. This is just your first wash. We will be building up colors in many layers. So keep it light and very transparent at this stage. I do the same thing with the other petal. So now for this petal, I have turned my board so that I can easily bring the brush towards me. When you paint in a comfortable position, you will make less mistakes. I'll be using the same colors on all the petals and same techniques that we used for the first one. Also, try to keep the overlapping edges lighter so that they look lifted. Here you can see me putting in some water droplets with the tip of my brush towards the end on both these larger petals to mimic the texture that I can see on them. So these water droplets will just repel the color and it will create these pockets of lighter color. This is a good way of creating texture. They are called as water blooms. So this is just the first wash. We will leave this layer to dry completely and come back for the next step. So after the first wash dries, I like to remove the pencil lines which are not required. In this case, we will erase off all the outer petal lines, retaining the vein lines and the center. And I just do this with a normal eraser and very gently. Now for this layer, I'll be working on the darkest tones of this painting, which are the shadows and the veins. So for these veins, I'm switching to size 1 brush from, this brush is from Billy Shovel. This brush has a super fine point which is required for this kind of line work. So I'll start with cobalt blue for the shadow and follow it up with the shadow mix. Now here I'm working with wet on dry technique, so I'll be using another brush as well to soften whatever colors we have applied, thus keeping everything very smooth and blended. For the veins, I take the same colors but keeping a close eye on the reference picture for the slight color shifts and tones, and after painting each vein, softening it with a damp brush. I continue this process on the whole petal, lightening my colors wherever the veins are light and fading away. This requires patience, so take your time. And the amount of details you want to apply, the amount of veins you want to apply is totally your own decision. While this dries, you can repeat the same process on all the petals. Okay, so here this layer has dried completely and now comes our next step. I still want to darken all the tones on this petal which I couldn't with the first wash. Usually I prefer wet on dry for the second layer, but in this case I'm going for wet on wet technique again to achieve very smooth and soft and blended result. So with size 6 brush, I again give a clean water glaze very gently over the entire petal, moving the brush in the direction of the veins. This time it's okay not to soak the paper like we did in the first wash, but an even glistening sheen. Then I start dropping the same colors in the same place, thus darkening all the tones, but still retaining the highlights. I just take very little color on the tip of my brush and be in total control. Putting a water glaze gives a soft effect and it also gives us time to further work on the petal. I keep on darkening the veins, and here I'm holding my brush flat on its belly with just little water, and with this I'm creating some horizontal lines, that is texture, which I can see in the reference picture. So now you can immediately see the difference between the first wash and the second wash on these petals. In this way, I work on all the petals, thus making all the tones one step more darker. Working in a systematic way reduces the stress and makes the painting journey so much more enjoyable. So just trust the process. So here now I'm erasing off all the remaining pencil lines, just excluding the center of course. This step is optional, but I like doing this as it makes the drawing look more soft. Now the next step is to work on all the very fine details using dry brush method. For this, I'll be using a size 0 brush from Golden Maple, and I'll use the same colors but in a very watery consistency. So take color on your brush and then tap off all the excess moisture from the brush on a kitchen towel. Keep it handy and then with just dry and very light pigment, give tiny strokes with the brush as if you're drawing with the brush. This is called as dry brushing. So we'll be using this technique now to finish the whole flower by working on very small areas at a time. This method will not only give you control but will also not disturb the underlying areas. It's definitely a time consuming process but so satisfying in the end. I start with the darkest tone on each petal, working meticulously on each tiny detail, painting in veins again if required, give textures, and also lifting off any highlights or any colors if I feel they are too dark. So I work with dry brush and finish off all the petals in the same manner. And after all the petals are done, then I start with the center. So let's quickly mix the colors for the center. Now I'll be retaining all those blues and violets because they are also in the center. And here I've kept two separate palettes, one for the yellows and one for mixing greens, just to keep all the colors very fresh. So now for the yellows which I see on the center, I'll be taking lemon yellow from Sennelier, just on its own. Little bit of Sennelier yellow deep, and also Kunakudun gold again from Sennelier. So basically I'm keeping all my three yellows, and then with Kunakudun gold and phthalo blue I'll be mixing in some warm green. So this will look like an olive green color, more of gold. So this is the color I can see on some parts of the center. The next I also want to mix some brighter green. So I'm taking lemon yellow plus Kunakudun gold plus phthalo blue. And you can keep on adjusting the consistency and the proportion of these three pigments to get the color you desire. And I'm trying to keep the same pigments even in the center, such as phthalo blue, mixing with yellows to keep all the colors in harmony. So I'll keep all these same colors on my palette, and other than these greens and yellows I also require a very dark black kind of color, which I'll get by mixing neutral tint, Winsor violet and phthalo blue, so which will come in all these very dark areas. So I'll continue with size 0 brush and I'll be painting in each tiny section one at a time, leaving enough, giving it enough time to dry and work in layers again even on these tiny spaces. So that way you will not muddy any colors and your colors will all look very fresh. So this flower is a 3-hour long tutorial in real time with voiceover, which I have just published on Patreon. All of my tutorials come with the reference picture, a detailed line drawing for you to trace from, a list of materials such as colors or colored pencils used for each project. So I continue working on the center with this tiny brush, and the center of the orchid is always a very complex, complicated, but yet very interesting part of this flower. So don't hurry. Keep on giving more layers and apply all your colors, appropriate colors in appropriate places. So while you're applying yellows, see that your blue colors are completely dry, otherwise the yellow will react with blue and make it green, and then it will be very difficult to revive those yellows again. So keeping all these things in mind, I paint the entire center, making it as detailed and as realistic as the reference picture, as working in a realistic style is my uh, favorite thing to do, I will say. So how much details you want to include, it completely depends on your personal choice. It completely depends from artist to artist. Whenever you're whenever you want to achieve very dark tone, then it's always better to get that dark tone in layers instead of applying very thick color. So after the center is done, I quickly finish the stems using the same greens that I have used on the center. So again, for the stems, I use a wet on wet technique for the first wash, for the first layer, and then I come in with wet on dry technique with more darker shadow colors. So if you like this video, then kindly like, share and comment on this video, and of course subscribe if you haven't already. So till next time then, bye.